maximization of profit for a select group of capitalists. You know, and they have done this at the expense of people here in the city of Detroit. 3 years ago, we called for a moratorium on foreclosures and evictions. And if they had listened to us, we could have saved probably 10,000 homes just here in the city of Detroit, not to mention the state of Michigan. But they allowed the banks to do whatever they wanted to do, and we have the situation that we have right now in the city, where if you drive around, I was driving around today, earlier this morning, and the grass is unkept. The city has cut the budget again. They say they don't have money to send workers out to cut the grass. And we have people even in this room who are laid off, who were city employees, who could have been reassigned to do that kind of work. You know, and they could have been kept on the job, but no, they're laying them off. So, you know, you got grass growing up, you got vacant homes all over the place. They're talking about other things that they're not going to be able to do. They're not going to be able to enforce blight to the extent that they have been able to enforce blight removal or the illegal dumping. They claim they don't have the resources now to enforce the effort to stop illegal dumping, even though it's been a very poor effort anyway. So this is what we're faced with right now. One other aspect of the economic crisis, of course, is political repression. We see an escalation in police brutality and what we call police terrorism, because that's really what it is. You know, they talk about terrorism in Afghanistan, they talk about terrorism in Iraq, they talk about terrorism in Somalia, they talk about terrorism here in the United States, but they say nothing about police terrorism, which is financed by the state and which is used principally against African Americans, Latinos, people of color, and working class people in general. So that's going to be the theme of our discussion today. And recently we had the murder of Aiyana Stanley Jones, a horrendous act. I mean, people all over the United States, all over the world are concerned about what happened. Now, comrades and friends, this is the second time in the last 6 months that we have held a public meeting to examine the role of the police and law enforcement agencies under the capitalist system. The first forum was in December. It was held to both commemorate the 40th anniversary of the United States government's assassination of Black Panther Party leader Fred Hampton and Mark Clark in Chicago, which took place on December 4th of 1969. And more recently, the target killing of Imam Lukman Amin Abdullah in Dearborn on October the 28th, 2009. So almost 40 years after the murder of Fred Hampton and Mark Clark, we had the assassination of Imam Lukman. So we did this in December, now we're back again in June. Both of these assassinations, the assassination of Imam Lukman and of course the assassination of Fred Hampton some 40 years ago, were actions that were conceived and executed by local and law enforcement agencies. The killings took place within a social and historical context that compelled the state to utilize various forms of terrorism against selected population groups, both local as well as global. Because in 1969, we had the Vietnam War was raging at that time. Thousands of Vietnamese were being killed every week by the US government. People here in this country were protesting in the millions against the Vietnam War. We had the moratorium to stop the war in Vietnam. I remember as a junior high school student, we walked out to commemorate the national moratorium to stop the war in Vietnam. That was in 1969. Now, during the early morning hours of May 16th, the home of Aiyana Stanley Jones on Lily Bridge Street on the city's east side was raided by the Detroit police. Soon a 7-year-old girl was dead, and a massive cover-up was engineered to make the cold-blooded murder of a child appear to be the fault of the family and an accident by the police. All kinds of stories have been told that they were selling drugs in the house, that there was a murderer in the house, that they were lying, you know, about what happened, that the grandmother tried to grab the gun of the police officer. But all of this can never justify the murder of a 7-year-old child under no circumstance. I don't care if Jack the Ripper, the Boston Strangler, or the Son of Sam were all in that house together, you know, drinking 40 ounces and smoking crack cocaine.
Right.
It doesn't matter.
That's right.
You know, it doesn't justify the murder of a 7-year-old child. We went over there the same day that this happened. They had toys in the yard. You can tell me the police didn't see those toys that were in the yard that belonged to children? No, they didn't care. They really didn't care.
To show who's boss.
Right, exactly. Now, At the December forum on Fred Hampton and Mark Clark and Imam Luqman, we utilized as a point of departure the first chapter of V.I. Lenin's book, State and Revolution. Now, I don't know how many people here have read that book, but if you haven't, you need to get a copy of it and read it. It's a very small book, and it's very easy to read. It was written almost 100 years ago by V.I. Lenin, back during the eve and during the course of the Russian Revolution. Lenin lays bare the nature and character of the state within capitalist society. Now, this book draws extensively on the earlier research by Engels, who was a collaborator of Karl Marx. Engels wrote a book called The Origins of the Family, Private Property, and the State. That's another book that people definitely need to read. Very easy book to read, very fascinating and interesting work as well. Now, Lenin says in chapter 1 of State and Revolution that, quote, Engels develops the conception of that power, which is termed the state, a power arising from society, but placing itself above it and becoming more and more separated from it. What does this power mainly consist of? It consists of special bodies of armed men who have at their disposal prisons, etc. Now, he wrote this in 1917. Engels wrote this during the latter part of the 19th century. This is still true today. Lenin emphasizes that, quote, a standing army and police are the chief instruments of state power. But can this be otherwise? This assertion by Lenin in 1917 is still true today. The capitalist state in the U.S. is relying more on the use of the repressive methods of the police, of federal agents, and the Pentagon. These are used to reinforce the exploitation and oppression of working people and the nationally oppressed. This greater reliance on state repression and police terror is taking place at a critical time period in the United States history. Although the objective conditions are such that it warrants a revolutionary response from the people, the large-scale outbreak of resistance and offensive political struggle has yet to take place. Nonetheless, for people who study and understand history, realize that there have been similar periods over the last 2 centuries where rebellions and revolutionary movements have emerged from the depths of horrendous criminal actions taken against the people. So just because we have a lot of oppression going on right now doesn't mean that the masses cannot rise up. We've seen it in history. Now, these revolutionary movements manifest themselves in many ways. Through flight from bondage, like during slavery. People ran away from slavery. To violent attacks on the property and social relations of production within an exploitative society. There were slave rebellions during slavery. There have been urban rebellions throughout the length and breadth of the United States history. Now, Lenin mentioned in this work that, quote, from the point of view of the vast majority of Europeans at the end of the 19th century, whom Engels was addressing in his book on the origin of family, private property, and the state, and who had neither lived through nor closely observed a single great revolution, this cannot be otherwise, unquote. Now, Lenin continues saying of the European workers of the period in which Engels was writing, the late 19th century, that, quote, they cannot understand at all what this self-acting, armed organization of the population really means. To the question, whence arose the need for special bodies of armed men, standing above society and becoming separated from it, police as well as standing armies. The Western European and Russian Philistines are inclined to answer with a few phrases borrowed from Spencer or Michalowski, by reference of the complexity of social life, the differentiations of functions, and so forth, unquote. Even under a so-called democratic system of government, as prevails in the United States, it is the dominant position awarded capital and its agents that is the determining factor in both domestic as well as foreign policy. In other words, their bottom line is to maximize profit. That's what the Pentagon upholds on an international level, and that's what the police and other federal agencies uphold on a domestic level.
Make it plain.
They support and they defend private property, and they defend the state, which is a reflection of the relations of production within society.